Welcome to another edition of Wildcat Country. Eric Cohen and Shane Dale. You know what, Shane? You were right, and I was wrong.
Love to hear it. Yeah, second week in a row, I think, right? I owe you some for you kicking my butt so bad during football season, and you should be happy too because I was actually the more optimistic of the two of us and guessing what was going to happen with both our basketball teams, and it's mainly just because I was in a good mood at the time, but I was right, and I'll take it.
I am glad, for once, I'm glad you're right and I'm wrong, because I love what we saw from the Wildcats. They played great. The women's team was fantastic in two games. The men's team was pretty darn good in their two games. I mean, they were great against Utah.
I will say you did call the Colorado game because you thought they were going to struggle a little more against Colorado, and they did. They got out. They fell behind by double digits early, but then they got their act together. So I will give you credit for that one.
Yeah, I don't think it was I wouldn't say the game was ever in doubt, Shane. Yeah. I think it was well in hand. I just thought that they wouldn't be as great. I mean, listen, they played outstanding against Utah, and they owed them a little payback. Just have a hint. Those Saturday games for Arizona, a little tricky. Now, before we get into the show, we have a great show today. We have Dennis Dodd, lead college football writer for CBS Sports, going to join us to talk everything Pac-12, Big 12. We haven't talked about that in a while on the show with a guest, so we're looking forward to chatting with him and glad to have him on the program. But I also want to talk about real fast that you and I did an event last Friday night at the Phoenix Airport Marriott. We have teased it on this program for at least 6 weeks with Rocky LaRose. And I'll just say it was an absolutely fantastic event, and great job to the East Valley chapter for putting that on.
A lot of fun. You and I been able to sit there with Rocky LaRose in between us and just reminiscing with her and asking her about her experiences at U of A as an athlete, as a coach, and then as a assistant AD, and then all her experiences with some of the great athletes and coaches we've known over the years. That was a lot of fun. One of my favorite parts of it actually was during we call it cocktail hour before we had our dinner. The Utah men's basketball team was staying at that hotel, and they were walking back and forth, the coaches and the players. And so everyone was saying, "Hey, beat ASU," because they're playing ASU the next day. And then they were looking back at us like, I don't want anything to do with y'all because y'all just beat us in Tucson. So that was kind of awkward and kind of fun. But no, it was a great time. Big thanks to the East Valley Alumni Association for allowing us to MC that and be part of a very special and well-deserved night for Rocky LaRose. And maybe we'll get to do it all again next year.
Yeah, and I would love to have her on the show at some point just to talk about. I mean, we had some really great conversations and some memories that she gave of Lute Olson and anybody. I mean, literally anybody that's come through between 1978 and 2013.
Steve Kerr, Rob Gronkowski, Dick Tomey,
Sean Miller,
Larry
the hiring
Smith,
process for Sean Miller. Yeah,
a lot of good stories there.
Great stuff there. So really excited to be able to do that. So thanks to the East Valley chapter, as we've said. And great to meet our friend Lance and his girlfriend who were there, longtime listener to the program. So it's great to be able to chat with him. All right. Let us get into it, Shane. It is Buy Yourself presented by Ice Shaker. Go to iceshaker.com and you can own one of those beauties that Shane is drinking on the YouTube feed. Use promo code Wildcat Country, capital W, capital C, for $5 off. Or you can go to fanatics.com and buy an Arizona ice shaker. So get your ice shakers today. These things are beautiful. I have one behind me on the stream if I can actually point in the right direction. Which one? There you go. That shoulder. Yeah, one of those. Yeah, there you go. I never know because the stream's back. Yeah,
I know it throws me off, but yeah, right there, we got our half-gallon jugs, and they're beautiful. They're works of art, not just because of the logo, but because they're very nice containers.
I don't know. I think the logo is a work of art. All right, Shane. Number one, Arizona is a worthy number 2 seed in the West per the NCAA Tournament Committee, as we saw on Saturday in their mock selection that they did for the top 16 teams in the tournament.
Yeah, definitely buy that. And I was pleasantly surprised that as of now, they would be the 2 seed in the West region, because I thought that would go to UCLA by virtue of their ratings in net and Ken Palm and a couple other metrics that are actually higher than Arizona. So I had a couple of big takeaways from that. Because if you don't know, Arizona was the number 6 overall seed as of Saturday morning before those slate of games, including Arizona's win over Colorado, which probably didn't move the needle either way. But a couple of big takeaways. Number one, I think Arizona would be a 1 seed in the West as of now had they not lost at Stanford. That was a
you think loss. So? You really think so?
Oh yeah. Well, it was a bad loss, Eric. There's just no way around it. I think that if they're the number 6 overall seed now, or they were a couple days ago, I think it's reasonable to think that they were a top 4 before that loss at Stanford. But along those lines, I think the committee, this year's committee anyway, based on what I saw with Arizona ranked number 6 and UCLA number 8, is the committee seems to place a higher priority on quality wins versus bad losses. Arizona has a couple bad losses. That loss at Stanford, the loss at home against Washington State were just not good. But they have some very nice looking wins. They have not just the 6 quad 1 wins, but they have 4 wins over top 20 net teams as of now. They also have wins over the number 1 and number 2 ranked defenses in KenPom, Tennessee and UCLA. So I'm again pleasantly surprised. Arizona's in very good shape. They could still get a 1 if they win out. We talked about that last week. But the 2 seed in the West, which I think is the most realistic goal going forward, is still very much in play. And what happens these next couple of weeks is going to have a lot to determine who's going to go out there.
All right. As of today, Arizona is a worthy number 2 seed in the West. But assuming they beat ASU this weekend, we'll talk about that later in the program. Then they have at USC and at UCLA. So let's say you split that trip with the win at USC, which is no gimme. I mean, USC fighting for its tournament life. If you do that, I think the winner of the Pac-12 tournament gets the number 2 seed in the West. If Arizona were to lose 2 of its last 3 regular season games, I don't think it matters what happens in the Pac-12 tournament. I don't think they can get a 2 seed.
Could be. And that's the other thing too, is I think the committee wants to put a team that plays out West in the West region as a 2 seed, especially if there's no West, if there's no true West team that gets the 1 seed, because as of now, Kansas would be the 1 seed in the West. And so I think if Gonzaga were to finish strong, maybe they would slide all the way up from number 4 to the 2 seed. So I think that it's likely going to come down to Arizona versus UCLA, but Arizona has to keep avoiding those landmines, and there's still a couple left. The ASU game, ASU's like USC, they're desperate as well.
Yeah,
we'll make our predictions for that later, but they're a very stingy defense. It's a game Arizona obviously should win on senior day, but not a gimme. USC kind of falls in the same category, and then UCLA is undefeated at home this year. And as Bruce Pascoe told us last week, Arizona has struggled in the second game each week, those Saturday games. They've lost all of their Pac-12 losses, except for the Utah game.
Was in December. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I just don't have a good feeling. Next weekend, as of right now, I don't have a good feeling. Now I'll explain why I don't later in the show, and we'll go from there. But okay, fair enough. And I will buy that as well. I think right now, Arizona's a worthy number 2 seed in the West.
Absolutely.
Right now. Yeah. Okay, number 2, Shane. If Arizona is to make a run in the NCAA tournament, Kylan Boswell will have to be one of the team's best 3 players.
I'll sell that. I don't think they have to be he has to be one of the best 3. I think he just needs to keep doing what he's doing. I think he needs to keep playing like he has in the last month or so, and be that key contributor off the bench, be a secondary point guard, and play off the ball if needed with Kirk Kriisa. I think Tubelis and Ballo, and there was a statistic that Umar Ballo's production, at least in terms of points and rebounds, is dipped a bit in the last month or so. He seems to have He improved. I don't say improved. It's not like he's played badly, but he sort of faded into the background a little bit more until his last couple of games against Utah and Colorado. So I think Tubelis and Ballo, that front court is going to be huge. And I think number 3 could be anyone. I've talked about how I think Kirk Kriisa, Arizona's chances really live and die with him and his ability to shoot well and avoid turnovers and avoid stupid mistakes, because he is an emotional guy, for better or worse. Pelle Larsson could be that guy. So Kylan Boswell could be that guy, and if he is, then Arizona's in great shape. But I don't think he has to be a top 3. I think he just needs to keep doing what he's doing.
Okay, so I'll actually sell this one as well, but here's my justification. I think Tubelis is the most important player for Arizona in the tournament. I think Kirk Kriisa is number 2.
Okay.
I think you can make an argument that Ballo, Pelle Larsson, or Boswell are number 3. And let me explain. Ballo's for obvious reasons. Larson or Boswell, one of those guys off the bench has to be a factor. If Arizona's bench doesn't do anything in the tournament, they're not going to last.
And that's fair. But the guy we haven't talked about is Courtney Ramey, who's just been lights out from 3.
Lights out lately.
And I love where the position Arizona's in terms of the 3-point shot, because they don't depend on it. And partly because of that, they shoot it well. They're actually the number 1 team in the Pac-12 in 3-point percentage, which is not what I would have predicted going into the season. So it's going to come down to whether they shoot. I don't think they have to shoot 45-50% from 3 to win, but I think they need to shoot close to what their average is. And Courtney Ramey is going to be a big part of that as well.
All right, number 3, Shane. Arizona cannot beat a good team if Kirk Kriisa doesn't shoot well and the bigs are in foul trouble by yourself.
I'll make it even simpler, Eric. I'll buy that Arizona can't beat a great team in the NCAA tournament if Kirk Reese doesn't shoot well. Period. I think it comes down to that. In Casey Jacobson, who I think I reference every single week on this show, and people are sick of it, but he's made a very good point that in Arizona's losses during Tommy Lloyd's tenure, Kirk Reese has shot horribly. In the games they've won, he's collectively at least shot well, close to his average. It's very difficult for them to win if he doesn't shoot well. And that goes to one of his criteria, Casey Jacobson's criteria for a Final Four team is great guard play. And Arizona's definitely better in the front court than they are in the back court. But if Kreese is shooting 40% from three, he's not making big mistakes. And you combine that with Pelle Larsson and Courtney Ramey and Kylan Boswell, keeping defenses honest by shooting well enough from the outside, I think they're unbeatable. But yeah, a combination of Kreese not shooting well and the bigs getting in foul trouble, forget about it. But I think Kreese needs to at least shoot 80% as well as he's capable of in an average game in order for Arizona to have a chance to win against most great teams.
I think you explained everything I was going to say, so I'm going to buy that one. I think you're right about Kreese, but I also think the foul trouble is key. If they stay out of foul trouble, even if Kreese doesn't shoot well, I can make an argument that they can beat a pretty good team. If Kreese shoots well and the bigs play well and don't stay and are not in foul trouble, Arizona can go to the Final Four. Simple as that.
Great.
Number 4, Shane. Arizona women's basketball has a chance now at a top 4 seed after their weekend sweep.
By 100%. Yeah. Before this week's slate of games, Charlie Cream, which is he's Joe Lunardi's counterpart on the women's side at ESPN, had Arizona as a 6 seed. But Arizona just beat 2 ranked teams, including then number 4 Utah. They smoked Colorado. They look very good doing it. Shayna Pellington won Pac-12 Player of the Week, and she was ESPN's National Player of the Week, and very well deserved. A great way for them, her and the seniors, to go out. But hopefully it won't be their last game at McHale. I think that I haven't looked at the bracketology lately, and they weren't in the top 16 in the women's side in the early projected seeds, but they might be now, or at least they think they're very close to it. I think beating 2 ranked teams in a row, even if it's at home, has to move them up a seed line. They moved up 4 spots in the AP poll, which is the highest that any team moved up this past week. And they got a couple of road games coming up, and those are going to kind of more be landmines than anything else because Oregon hasn't played well. Oregon State's not very good, and they struggled against both those teams at home, even though they beat them. So they got to keep it going, but they have gotten themselves back in the discussion with those victories.
Yeah, I think this is a must sweep. Now, this ends the regular season for the Wildcats. They go to the Pac-12 tournament next weekend. It's a weekend earlier than the men. This is crucial. You have to sweep this weekend. Otherwise, it's no longer a discussion. Then the seniors will not play at home again. Simple as that.
Well, possibly. And I think if you look at the Pac-12 tournament, as of now, Arizona would be the number 4 seed. So they get that first round bye in the Pac-12 tournament. They if I'm reading it right, they need to split against the Oregon schools to stay in the top 4 and avoid UCLA leapfrogging them. But that's big because you have to play 1 fewer game, and there's no value in being the 5 seed because you'd play an ASU team that's winless in the Pac-12, which is kind of hard to believe based on where they've been where they were a couple of years ago. And the drop off with Charlie Turner-Thorne gone is insane. But getting that top 4 seed, but they would very likely be the number 4 seed. They would very likely play UCLA in that game. Looking ahead to the Pac-12 tournament, they'd probably have to win that game. And then they face Stanford, which is probably a loss because Stanford's just demolished them in the 2 games they played. So, it could be a situation. I think if they were to sweep the Oregon schools on the road, which is not an easy trip, they do that. They come back and they beat UCLA again, a second time in the Pac-12 tournament. I think that would be enough to get them in. If they split against the Oregon schools, even if they beat UCLA and then lose to Stanford, that they're on very shaky ground.
Number 4, Shane, or excuse me, what is it? Number 5? I can't count today. Arizona baseball's opening weekend performance, 3-1 in Scottsdale this weekend. Buy or sell?
I buy it all the way. Other than the one stinker, going 3-1, opening the season with a win over number 2 Tennessee. I think the bloom came off the rose a little bit when GCU beat Tennessee the next day, but still, it was and GCU's a good team too, so there's no shame in that at all. But great start, 3-1. They held on to beat UC San Diego on Monday. We're recording Monday night, just for full disclosure. Is it the MLB Desert Invitational? TJ Nichols won Pac-12 Pitcher of the Week honors, allowed just 1 run in that game against Tennessee.
And by the way, Shane, let me cut you off here.
Yeah.
They beat Tennessee's ace. Now, I don't remember his name offhand, but that's a big deal. When they played Tennessee first, it's not like you're getting the 2 and 3 starters. They got their number 1. And this is arguably a top 2 team in the country, and Arizona beat it. Well, there, then and there. Yeah.
Yeah. And Monday's win was a slugfest, but otherwise Arizona won mostly due to its pitching, which is good to see early on. On the hitting side, Chase Davis is off to a hot start. He's already got a couple of home runs. Wildcats aren't ranked as of now, but I think there's a decent chance that'll change soon. Baseball America did project them before the season to at least advance to regionals, their preseason projections, which I think is the minimum expectation again in Chip Hale's second season after making it there last year. They were beaten, remember, by the eventual national champions, Ole Miss.
Right.
They got 3 games against West Virginia at High Corbett this weekend. They should probably win 2 of those, but a solid start. I'll buy it 100%.
Yeah, very encouraging. Now, number 6, Shane, softball's weekend performance. Now, they beat a top 10 team, but also struggled a little bit.
Yeah, kind of an up and down weekend. They lost their first 3 games, although they were all close. They had lost 6-4 to number 6 Florida State, which was essentially a home game for Florida State. But they won their last 2 games of the trip to Florida. They beat number 8 Virginia Tech 6-2. Devin Netz had a fantastic pitching performance in that game. She's going to need to continue to be great, as like she was toward the end of last season, in order for Arizona to make another run to the Women's College World Series. They lost a couple key hitters to UCLA, which still stings. But Caitlin Lowe did a pretty good job replacing them. They have some good young players. Kaya Altmaier, who Caitlin Lowe stole away from Texas A&M. She's batting over 500 to start the year. So, I think it's important to remember, as outstanding and legendary a coach as Mike Candrea was, and Rocky LaRose had some great stories about him too during the Toast and Taste. Arizona's softball program wasn't as dominant over the last decade of his tenure as it was previously. And so it's possible that program isn't considered as elite as it used to be in softball circles. So Caitlin Lowe has, in that way, maybe he has sort of a rebuilding job to do, not just in terms of replacing Mike Candrea, which is not easy, but in getting the program back to perennial national championship contender. I don't know if that's realistic or not. It's too early to say, but I think they're on pace to right where they should be. And the good news is that even though they lost 3 games in that tournament in Florida last weekend, they were all competitive, unlike some of the games we saw last year when they were getting run-rolled at home. So I think Coach Lowe has them going in the right direction.
I would agree with that. I just am concerned. We talked the same thing last year, Shane. Couldn't beat ranked teams. So they got one this weekend, which is nice. But I just think this is a team kind of like North Carolina basketball. Do you sleepwalk and then you catch fire? You just get in the big dance and you see what can happen and catch fire? I don't know. Well, I'm very curious to see how this team does during Pac-12 play, and we will discuss them often. I think they play Arkansas a lot this week. Arkansas and Drake in Fayetteville this weekend. So quite a I think they play 3 against Arkansas and 2 against Drake, something like that. If my memory serves me correctly, I don't have it in front of me. So good luck to the softball team this weekend. Baseball as well. Do we know who they play offhand, Shane? Do we have a? Yeah,
they got who was it who's coming into town? I just had it in front of me. They got West Virginia. Okay. By the way, do you like the new nickname for High Corbett, the Juice Box?
I do like that. That's been around for a little while.
Has it been? I haven't heard it until recently, so maybe I've been asleep. But High Corbett, High C, Juice Box. I hadn't heard that until the last year or two, so I thought maybe that was sort of a new thing.
It's not bad. I like that. Let's talk to Dennis Dodd from CBS Sports. Find out what he thinks about the craziness that is the Pac-12 TV deal. What a disaster, Shane. Here on Wildcat Country. Scooby, we sent you an ice shaker. They are a sponsor, courtesy of our buddy Chris Gronkowski. You have it right there.
I love my ice shaker. Fun fact: when I trained with Glenn Gronkowski, everybody, when we were trained together, people thought I was the other Gronk brother. So it's kind of funny. But yes, I love my ice shaker. It is very good. I use it every day. I am a veteran to the ice shaker game, by the way.
What's up, Wildcat Country? Chris Gronkowski here. Use coupon code Wildcat Country at iceshaker.com.
Very glad to be joined, Shane, by one of my CBS colleagues, Dennis Dodd, senior college football writer for CBS Sports and CBSSports.com. Dennis, you wrote a great column late last week about the Pac-12 and all of the problems they have been having. And one of the issues, obviously, is the TV deal. But I've been very vocal with Shane on this podcast that Arizona's got to get rid of this dying conference and move on to the Big 12. In a year, if I were to ask you a year from today, what conference is Arizona a part of?
I think they'll be in the Pac-12. A disclaimer in writing all that. I think the likelihood of the Pac-12 staying together is high. The point of it was, what if? And number two, it's now openly being talked about in industry sources that like this thing may not hold together. I still think they're going to get some sort of offer from ESPN and Amazon. I don't think certainly it'll be for what they want, but to stay together, I think that's what they're going to have to take, and the ramifications will take care of themselves. So I do think there will be a Pac-12, and whether Arizona is in it or not is almost a secondary question, because we know where Brett Yormark's coming from. Do certain schools in the Pac-12 become nervous enough to consider what now is significant security in the Big 12? Because I think it's one thing the Pac-12 staying together. Another is, how do you get all 10 of those teams to sign a grant of rights? Where, if you're Oregon or Washington alone, you'd want to keep your options open. And is that grant of rights amended, or simply, they don't have one? The SEC doesn't have one, for instance, because why would you need one in the SEC?
You don't. Listen, there was a rumor that we heard months ago or last summer that maybe Arizona, long-term SEC were like, okay, this is not realistic, but hey, with basketball, we'll take it. In all seriousness, though, when you talk about the Pac-12, they'll be down to 10 teams once the SoCal schools leave next year. What do you see as potential expansion candidates? Obviously, San Diego State and SMU have been rumored. Is there anyone else we're not talking about right now that might make sense?
I think it's those two, because for them, it's the best two on the board. Because when you're in a situation like the Pac-12, it doesn't make sense to share whatever you're getting with two extra mouths to feed. But I believe they have been told to expand and sign a new deal concurrently, because the deal wouldn't get signed without that expansion. So they're going to try to do it somewhat concurrently. That increases the inventory, if you will, from about 65 games to about 72, something like that. I don't have the numbers exactly right, but what it represents is a 20% increase in the inventory they have now. So whoever is bidding, if it's just about getting more games on, because very few of those games are tier one game, without USC and UCLA, I don't have to tell you, very many of those games are very desirable for television. So you go the other way and just try to get more games.
Dennis, obviously Arizona is a men's basketball school, but in terms of the TV deals, it's all about football. What would be the best case scenario for Arizona? And is any other sport play a factor in this, or is it all come down to football?
It's really all comes down to football. Basketball only contributes 15 to 20% of any media rights deal. And we're talking about the best conference in the country in basketball to begin with, does it enhance the competition? Absolutely. Yeah. Brett Yormark at this point, though, may be more interested in Gonzaga to get them in case, or in addition to get in the Pac-12 time zone with those Pac-12 schools, and maybe adding Gonzaga as well as a basketball only member. So his real reach is, I think it's the four corner schools. I'll put it this way, to make the biggest splash in the Pacific time zone he can, because then you can be on from noon till late night, and no other conference except the Big Ten can say that, because they obviously have Big Noon. With USC and UCLA, they will have late night, and so that's significant across the board to advertisers, to the value of the deal, which is pretty much struck right now. But I think the biggest thing for the Pac-12 is whoever they add, it's basically paid for. ESPN owns 63% of the deal. Fox would have to, they're the other 30%. Fox would have to agree to fund some of it. And then I think to get the deal done for any expansion, I think a streamer would have to come in like Amazon to guarantee that, because the two main rights holders, ESPN and Fox, don't want to pay that much more. So to defer those costs, I think you'd see some on Amazon. And the Big 12's already there on ESPN Plus. So it wouldn't be that big a deal.
How much, Dennis, does Arizona's on-field performance matter in this? In terms of, obviously, they've been one of the worst teams in the country until last year. They starting to turn a corner, and they have at least bowl aspirations this year. How much does that factor into what's going on right now?
Well, like Arizona State potential. Look, Arizona State's in the 11th biggest market. Obviously, Tucson's a bit smaller, but I'm writing something right now. I hearken back to last August when Burke Magnus, ESPN programming executive, made a pretty bold statement. He said, it's not so much about markets for us anymore. It's about rivalries. It's about traditions. And so Arizona State, that alone would help. The Territorial Cup. If you look at what is left of the Pac-12, I'm just doing some figures here. I think the Apple Cup was the 5th highest rated Pac-12 game, minus USC and UCLA the last 2 years. And the Civil War, Oregon State was number 1. So the rivalries matter. So in that small piece, Arizona State, that would matter.
If you were Arizona's leadership and Arizona State and Utah and Colorado, the four corner schools, would you be ready to make a move here, or would you let this thing play out?
I think I keep my options open. I mean, how can you not? Especially when there's no certainty as we record this on Monday afternoon of where this is all going to end up. I mean,
right.
If the presidents or leaders of those four corner schools were smart, they would have the lines of communication open to the Big 12 or whoever, probably the Big 12 right now. Don't limit yourself. I mean, we know for a fact that Oregon and Washington, my reporting has confirmed that they talked to the Big 10. Washington was intimately involved with gauging its interest. In fact, some of their officials were in New York. This is last fall. But look, when your existence is on the line in a major conference, the same thing happened to the Big 12 twice, in 2010 and then in 21 when they lost Texas and Oklahoma. Those ADs and presidents were on the phone right away with other leagues. So I assume, and I would almost predict, that's what's going on in Arizona.
If you were to predict the college football landscape in 4 or 5 years, do you see it being 4 20-team conferences or thereabout, or do you still seeing it being the haves, the have not? I mean, how do you view it 4 or 5 years down the road?
I think you got to factor in what the expanded playoffs is going to look like. So number one, what kind of access do they have when we know in 4 or 5 years, as it is now, the SEC and Big Ten are, rule everybody. They're ahead of everybody by far. So what does that mean? How are they going to decide in 2026 what access looks like? Because don't forget, everything's on the table after those first 2 years. What is the revenue distribution going to look like? So I think those questions are more important than, the amount of teams in conferences, because there's going to be a finite number. There's a finite number for the SEC and Big Ten, and they may have hit it already. I mean, that's what's so dangerous about the Pac-12. Maybe they're not interested in Oregon and Washington. We know the Big 12 is about at least those 4 corners. But I think it's less about the size and more about the relevance. If somehow the access to the 12-team playoff is, and I would almost guarantee it's going to get away from the 6-and-6 model, 6 guaranteed and 6 at large, because those SEC and Big 10 want as many as they can get in. That's not going to change. That exists now. As many as you can get in, you can get in. And why would you want to share in a league that maybe in the future includes, I don't know, Fresno State, Boise State? And I'm just spitballing here, but I think that's where this is headed.
Dennis, my last question for you. I got to ask about this because Mick Cronin had some interesting comments about that first top 16 NCAA tournament reveal with Arizona number 6 overall and his Bruins at number 8. He thought it was ridiculous, and he seems like he even suggested that UCLA's impending exodus to the Big Ten had something to do with that. What's your take on that?
Yeah, it was ridiculous. I mean, the things these coaches come up with for conspiracy theories, the Jim Boeheim thing was out of some sort of fantasy zombie movie, that he's about the NIL stuff. It bordered on the ridiculous. This is just that look, this is a throwaway top 16. It's a selection committee a few years ago agreed to do a month before the tournament. It's fodder for us as consumers to look at, but for them to waste energy and sit there and go remember, a fantasy top 16 for a tournament that's happening in a month. to assume you're going to be a top 2 seed and have to travel, if you make it that far, instead of Arizona, is and Arizona playing at home is just ridiculous. That's a lot of wasted mind space. And I tweeted about it today. I just said, what are we talking about? These guys, these coaches sometimes are brilliant, but in their downtime, I don't know what they're thinking about sometimes.
Mick is certainly a unique personality, we'll say, in the Pac-12 and soon to be Big Ten. All right, last question for you, Dennis, and thank you so much for joining us. When I say Arizona Wildcats football from a national perspective, what immediately comes to mind?
Be kind, Dennis.
I think on the come. I mean, there's a lot of work to be done there. Look, Vanderbilt's in the SEC. They get the same money as Alabama. So if you can hook your wagon to one of these conferences, there's still a Power 5 card to be played by the likes of those schools we're talking about. So I'm not going to blow smoke and tell you Arizona's a top 20 program, because they're not. They got a lot of work to do. But I do think they're headed on the right track. There was improvement last year. Recruiting is going well. I think they're on the come.
Dennis, thanks to you so much for joining us. Great to talk with you on short notice. And this should be very interesting to see how it plays out over the next months, year, who knows. So thank you once again.
Yeah, guaranteed. Thanks, guys.
If you're looking to add value to your sports cards, you've got to check out dtsportscards.com. They're an authorized dealer for PSA, which means you'll get great prices on your submissions if you go through them. And for just $2 a card, DT Sports Cards will take a close look at each card you submit and let you know whether it's worth grading. I just submitted some high-end hockey cards. They took a very close look, said they're good to go, and they all earned a PSA 10 grade, which tripled the value of each card. DT Sports Cards is located right here in Arizona. They provide quick, personalized service through email or direct messages. Find them online at dtsportscards.com and check them out on Instagram at dt_sportscards.
Thanks to Dennis Dodd for joining us. Really a cool guest to have on in the middle of football off season.
Working your CBS connections.
It doesn't hurt that he and I are colleagues from a little bit afar, but he does a great job and great to be able to chat with him. But one thing that he said towards the end of the interview, and I thought it was a great question by you, Shane, about Mick Cronin from UCLA saying that, the Bruins are hosed because we're leaving the Pac-12 and we're not getting a 2 seed in the West. Dennis thinking that is one of the stupidest things he's heard. Your thoughts?
Mick Cronin's a great coach. He's done a fantastic job at UCLA, I think better than a lot of people expected, but there seems to be a theme with him about blaming other people or blaming outside influences. Both of UCLA's Pac-12 losses, he's essentially blamed on officiating against Arizona and then USC, those back-to-back games. He complained about officiating one way or the other. And now he's blaming UCLA's lower than expected seeding in this preliminary seeding by the NCAA selection committee on people bitter that they're leaving for the Big Ten, which is, I don't know if there's a method to mix madness. I don't know if it's going to change anything, but he just seems like comes off as kind of a whiner. And I try to be fair because obviously we're pro Arizona and anti UCLA, but it's hard not to come to that conclusion, isn't it?
Let me say this. Mick Cronin is a very good coach, as you said. He's also a head case. Simple as that. Just watch him on the sidelines. He's a head case. Yeah. Sean Miller's a head case. He was on the sidelines. Tommy Lloyd, not a head case. Just my observation. Call me crazy. Just being honest. Dana Altman, not a head case. Bobby Hurley, he's a head case. Yeah. Speaking of, Shane, let's first of all, let's talk about we have a big sports card show. I just wanted to touch on that. This segment is brought to you by DT Sports Cards. Shane, this weekend you're going to be a seller at the sports card show for the first time. First time ever. If you're in the East Valley or in anywhere in the Valley, 644 East Chandler Boulevard in Chandler from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. on Saturday. I will be a seller at that card show. I got all kinds of stuff, both graded and ungraded cards, so come check it out. And then our sponsor, DT Sports Cards, will be there accepting PSA submissions. Basically, all the great deals that you normally would have to be a subscriber for to get a discount on grading. You can just go through them, DT Sports Cards. They'll accept submissions on the spot. You can go to their website, dtsportscards.com, and
do a submission beforehand and then just there you go, got the right thumb there, and then and turn it in there. They'll also Dave at DT Sports Cards will look at your cards too for an extra $2 a card and tell you whether they're worth sending in or not. So if you come on down, send some cards in to get graded, and then come and stop by my table and buy some stuff. I'll make you some good deals, especially if you mentioned that you had heard about it on Wildcat Country.
Oh, look at that. You got the Shane Dale Wildcat
right.
Country discount.
I didn't put a number on it, but you'll definitely earn some points if you mention the podcast.
Good luck this weekend. All right, before we get going, before we make picks too, so NCAA football, there are 4 proposals under consideration.
Yeah.
By the Rules Committee. I just want to quickly, yay or nay, if you like these or not, Shane. Okay. Number 1, prohibiting consecutive timeouts, i.e. icing kicks.
Yeah. It's something the NFL does. I think it's a big time suck, especially at the end, and even at the end of halves too. Coaches will just use them because they have them. Yeah, one timeout is enough.
I agree with that. So dumb when coaches can save all 3 timeouts and use them at the end of a half. It's a terrible rule. I hope they change this.
Yep.
Number 2, no untimed down at the end of the first quarter and third quarter.
Yeah, that's easy. Like if there's a penalty, just roll it into the next quarter. That to me is a no-brainer as well. It doesn't change much of anything.
Okay, so those are the first 2. Number 3, this one's pretty sizable. The clock will run after first downs, except inside instead of 2 minutes and a half.
I think that's fair. Yeah, I never really understood why the clock stops anyway. I know they have to move the chains, but the NFL manages to move the chains without the clock stopping. So I would probably be okay with getting rid of that rule altogether. But if in the spirit of compromise, I'd be fine with that too.
I love stopping the clock inside 2 minutes. It gives teams more of a chance. I wish the NFL kind of did it, to be honest with you. And number 4, now this is the one, Shane. Clock runs on incompletions once the ball is spotted.
Yeah, and the other rule. Well, in the other ones, I think the NFL already does, except maybe number 2. Yeah. I know our guy Phil Steele likes the idea of running the clock after incompletions. The NFL doesn't do that. Blair Willis, our guy, I talked with him about it on Twitter briefly, and he said that he doesn't like it because it just changes the strategy, especially late in games. So I might come up with some sort of happy medium there, where maybe the clock, maybe in the first and third quarter and early in the second and fourth quarter, the clock keeps running, but maybe late in games, get rid of that, like the last 2 minutes of the half, last 5 minutes of the fourth quarter. I don't know, but even if the first 3 get implemented, that might reduce the time
significantly, yeah. Shane. And the one that's the biggest is the stopping the clock after every first down. That would, you figure 20, 30 seconds. And let's say there's 40 first downs in a game. Yeah.
If you do that, you might not need that last rule. And I think that alone would probably get us on par, because I think NFL games last typically between 3 hours, 20.
3:15. Yeah.
And college games are almost always a minimum 3.5 hours. So that would at least get them down to the NFL level.
It would make it better. I think also you look at the NFL's a 15-minute halftime, college is a 20-minute halftime. Got to get marching bands and stuff like that. That's another one I'd consider. Do we really need a 20-minute halftime?
No.
I'm just saying no. All right, let's before we get going here, let's make some picks for the weekend. Mm-hmm. You have been on fire lately. You've called 8-0 over the last 2 weekends. The men's team takes on ASU, the women's team at Oregon State. Or at Oregon State first, I believe, and then at Oregon, Oregon first, then Oregon State. All right, Shane, what do you like here? Give me a record for the weekend.
Let me start with the men. I think Arizona beats ASU. I think it's going to be another kind of pain in the butt game, like last year's game in Tucson was. And ASU, look, we don't like to say anything nice about them, but their defense is stingy. And in fact, in KenPom, they're still ranked a little bit higher than Arizona is on the defensive side of the ball. Frankie Collins is a legitimately good point guard. I think he's going to be their rock for the next couple of years, assuming Bobby Hurley stays and is able to convince Frankie Collins to stay. He's a legit good point guard. But Arizona's a better team. They're going to be playing at home. It's going to be senior day. You're going to have that emotion. And if it's a close game late, I don't have any confidence that ASU is going to be able to make big plays. If you watch the last couple of games, even the ones that they've won that have been close, they just chuck 3-pointers late in games and pray that they go in. It worked against Utah. It worked against Stanford a couple of weeks ago, but they just don't, unless the opposing team misses a shot and they score in transition, like off a made basket, off a timeout, they can't run anything. And so a few minutes left in the game. It's a close game. And Mikhail, I think Arizona finds a way to win it. So I think it's closer than we'd like, but I think Arizona wins. the women's side, I wish I could predict the sweep, but it's tricky. Oregon's not been playing well at all, but they're going to be at home. That's a tough trip. I have a feeling that Arizona may trip up at Oregon. They come back and they beat Oregon State. But I think that they split. I think that they're more than capable of sweeping. They probably should. But I think I'm going to say 2-1. I think the ladies split on the road and the men beat ASU.
All right, Shane, here's some stats. I'm going to start with the women. Oregon has lost 9 of 10. Oregon State has lost 10 of 11.
Mm-hmm.
Arizona's sweeping these two teams.
We'd love to see it.
I'm just saying that. I mean, these teams are in a tailspin.
Yeah.
Arizona's sweeping these two teams. And the Wildcats are playing well, 1-3 in a row. So I'm going to say 2-0 there. On Saturday against ASU, I think I would not be surprised in the least if ASU is ahead at halftime. And I would not be surprised in the least if we are inside the 10-minute mark. ASU has a lead, and we're thinking, here we go again. Mm-hmm. I think this game, personally, is going to be lower scoring and close. I think Arizona wins this game by 5-ish, but I would not, as a betting man, I'm not playing the spread, whatever it is. I would just tread carefully.
What do you think the spread will be? Like 10, 12, somewhere in that range?
9, 8.5, 9, somewhere in that ballpark, maybe up to 11.
Yeah.
This is not a game I would bet on. I think this is one you watch as a fan. Doesn't matter how much of an Arizona fan you are. Keep your money in your pocket. Don't bet this game. I think ASU is going to make this one really interesting.
Well, and they're a desperate team. They're a desperate team. They have some great opportunities in front of them. They have to, they're at Arizona, they're at UCLA, at USC, all chances for big wins, and they have to win at least. They have to at least split between Arizona and UCLA to have a chance unless they win the Pac-12 tournament. So they're going to be in desperation mode, which is always a little concerning. Arizona's got the emotion of senior day, but is that going to get the best of them? So I think Arizona wins, but I think like the football game and like last year's game in Tucson, I think we're going to be squirming in our seats a little more than we would like.
I think we're going to agree there, and I hope, Shane, that we're wrong there. But I'm saying 3-0, you're saying 2-1.
And I hope you're right this week about that.
We'll see. I'm buying into the women's team after doubting them for 2 weeks in a row. Adia, I hope you will forgive me. Thanks to Dennis Dodd for joining us this week. Great to be able to chat with him. For Shane Dale, I'm Eric Cohen. Another great show on Wildcat Country. Thanks for listening. And as always, bear down.